Hey, what's up guys? I'm Jeff and welcome to the Centrist. So this is the first video on the channel, and for this first episode I thought it'd be fitting to discuss centrism and radical centrism, what they are and why I personally identify with them. And then later in the video I wanted to go over why I'm creating this channel in the first place. I've been on YouTube for a while now, about 6 years or so, and I've never done anything political on the site outside of a few vlogs where I've discussed recent events. But other than that, I've pretty much stayed non-political here on YouTube. So I'll go over my reasoning a bit, and then I'll end by letting you guys know what my plans are for the first two full videos here on the channel. So let's begin by discussing what centrism is. So the Oxford Dictionary definition of a centrist is a person who holds political beliefs that are not extreme. So using that definition, a centrist is really no different than a moderate, somebody who holds moderate political views. Perhaps they're slightly on the left, perhaps they're slightly on the right, maybe they're more in the center, don't really agree with either side on too many issues. So the idea is that they are a person who holds moderate beliefs, who does not want either side to hold too much power, wants balance between the two sides. Perhaps they believe that, if one side gains too much power, that you'll see tyranny, a more authoritarian government. So the centrist wants balance, compromise, stability, and moderate policies. Now, there's been a lot of memes and jokes and criticisms towards centrists over the last few years coming from both sides. Politics today are particularly polarized. You have both sides who vehemently disagree with each other, and not only that, they see the other side as almost evil. The other side is authoritarian, that seeks to take your rights and liberties from you. Now, they disagree over which rights and liberties should be protected, which rights and liberties that other side is seeking to take from you. So they disagree on that, but they do agree that the other side is toxic, dangerous, and authoritarian. And so increasingly both sides are seeing their political opponents as threats to democracy, to their freedom, to their lives, and to their right to pursue happiness. So in this challenging and extremely significant political battle, they've come to see anybody who is not 100% for the same policies they are for as being opposed to them, as being against them, an enemy who they must destroy. Then you have the centrists, who in this fight between good and evil are just sitting in the middle, of fence sitters who are not choosing the side of good. So therefore you're seeing a lot of criticism coming from both sides towards centrists, particularly after elections from the losing side. So here in the United States, after 2016 election, you had a lot of people from the Democrats on the left who blame centrists for either not coming out and voting in high enough numbers or voting for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. And similarly, after the 2020 election, the right wing, who couldn't really blame the centrists for not coming out and voting, because obviously we had very high voter turnout in 2020, but who they did blame for voting for Joe Biden over Donald Trump. Now, that view is understandable considering the fact that about 35% of Americans identify as being moderate or centrist, and therefore they are the ones that are controlling who wins the election. Democrats are always going to vote for the Democrat, Republicans are always going to vote for the Republican, and thus it's really the people in the middle who are choosing which side's going to win that election. So I suppose the criticism is justified, but it's the mean-spirited nature, the toxicity of the criticism towards those in the center that I find concerning. In addition to the criticism, there's also the jokes and memes about the center coming from both sides that I mentioned earlier. And one thing that I've seen from across the board, whether it's the jokes or the genuine criticism, is that there seems to be a misunderstanding about what centrism really is and what a centrist is. So to provide an example, there's a right-wing meme where it says the right wants to save the lives of all babies while the left wants to murder all babies, and the center, in the name of compromise, comes up with the best course of action being to murder half of the babies. Now, of course, this is just a joke, but what you'll see underlying these jokes and the criticisms is the fact that most people seem to think that centrist, that they're no different than the right or the left. The right and the left, they prescribe to a particular ideology. Perhaps it's liberalism, maybe it's conservatism, maybe it's socialism, maybe it's fascism. And if they're dedicated to that ideology, then it tells them what they should think about every public policy, every idea, tells them exactly what their position should be on that particular issue. Of course, people are individuals, and just because somebody identifies with an ideology doesn't mean they prescribe to 100% of the policies and ideas of that ideology. We have a lot of variance in this. But for the most part, if you tell me you're on the left or you tell me you're on the right, then I have a good idea of what position you would take on every single policy. So people think inaccurately that the center is the same way, that they also have an ideology that determines what policies they're going to support. So essentially, their ideology is the center, just based on the name of centrism. And so they'll take the proposed policy of the right and the proposed policy of the left, and then just go right down the middle. That's obviously the best answer, is whatever is in the middle. And of course, if that's what being a centrist was, then I would be an idiot for calling myself one, since that doesn't make any sense. Completely ignores the fact that maybe one side's policy is more legitimate, more helpful, more effective than the other side's policy, because you're just going right down the middle, assuming that they're both equally effective. And that's where that perception comes from, that centrists are just fence sitters, that they have no strong beliefs, they don't really truly care about anything, and then all they really want to do is moderate the policies of the other ideologies. But essentially, they just want to water down the policies of the other ideologies and make them so they're not as effective, just in the name of being balanced and fair and moderate, even if that's not the most effective way to govern. But all that is a misconception. That is not what a centrist is. Now, while in general, centrists do oppose very extreme policies, so policies that are on the extreme left or the extreme right, in general, they do want more moderate policies. That doesn't mean they don't have strong beliefs. Many centrists do have very strong beliefs on particular issues. They may only lean to one side. A centrist may not be exactly in the center. They may be what we typically call here in America a moderate. So they may be more moderately on the left, or they support more leftist policies, but not the more extreme measures, or maybe they're slightly on the right, where they support more right-wing policies, just not the more extreme versions of those policies. Centrism is not an ideology that tells you which policies you should support and where you should stand on each issue. Centrism recognizes that we are all individuals with different backgrounds and different upbringings, different cultures, and very different belief systems, and therefore we should determine for ourselves, based on our own personal preferences, which policies we support and why. It's about thinking for yourself and not allowing anybody, whether that's a family member or a politician or some guy who wrote a book 100-something years ago, to tell you what to think and which policies you should support. That's essentially what centrism is. Pretty quick to go over, because it's not a very difficult topic, because it's not an ideology. Eventually on this channel, I'd like to have one dedicated video for each ideology. So one for socialism, one for liberalism, one for conservatism, so on. And each of those videos will discuss their respective ideology in depth. And thus I do assume that they'll be much longer than this one, because again, this is not an ideology. So we mentioned that centrism at its core really does not support the more extreme policies. But what about a centrist who do support more extreme solutions to some of the problems that plague our society, such as myself, which you'll see throughout the course of watching content on this video, that I actually do support some more radical policies, because when dealing with that particular policy, the old traditional policies have already proven time and time again to not be effective. And there are many centrists, particularly nowadays, who identify this way, who do support more radical solutions. And this is called radical centrism, a form of centrism that is becoming more and more popular, and the form of centrism that I would identify with myself. I would call myself a radical centrist. Where I stand policy-wise is always specific to the issue, whether I support a more moderate or more radical solution, as well as if I support a policy that's on the left or the right. It's always very specific to that issue. Honestly, I think that's how everybody should consider politics and public policy, and I hope that with this channel, some of you may come to agree with that, maybe move away from the left or the right, and move more towards moderate or radical centrism. But the main purpose of this channel is not to convert you, it's to open up a discussion about public policy, a topic that is increasingly becoming the main thing on all of our minds. And so that brings us to why I'm starting this channel. So I've been into politics for a very long time, well before it was the trendy thing that everybody was talking about. When I went to college from 2011 to 2015, which I did go a bit late. I'm 35 years old, so I was in my mid to late 20s when I was at university, and I got a BA in history and in political science. Not only was I interested in politics, I actually wanted to work in politics. Now, I did not want to be a politician. I did not want to be the face of policies. I think politicians are kind of scummy. I don't really have much for them. And frankly, they really aren't much other than the face. They don't write policy. They don't write bills. They don't really do anything except for talk and run their mouth and lie. They rarely do anything that actually helps the majority of the people. But when they do pass legislation, they didn't really do a lot of work themselves. Instead, they have an entire team behind them, and they do the majority of the real work. And that's what I wanted to do. I want to be part of that team. I wanted to write legislation. I wanted to have a role in actually determining policy, public policy in the United States. Of course, my life took me in a very different direction, so I've never actually used my degree when it comes to employment. But since I graduated in 2015, politics have become more and more the primary topic of discussion in our society. And that has made me want to get more and more involved, considering this is a topic I'm very passionate about. But probably the primary reason I'm starting this channel is because I, like many Americans, am very concerned about the direction that this country and just Western society in general is going. I saw a poll recently where I believe it was like 80-something% of Americans believe that this country is heading in the wrong direction. And so obviously that would include people from all spectrums, the right, the left, and the center. So a majority of Americans agree with me. There's something really wrong with this country right now. Where we disagree, of course, is what is wrong and how to fix it. Frankly, I'm not sure how that small minority, less than 20%, but still a significant minority of Americans think that things are going okay. Like, I'm not sure how you see the current situation in this country and think that things are fine. I mean, we just had 2 elections back to back, 2016 and 2020, where one side said that the elections were not legitimate, that the person who had won was not the legitimate winner of the presidential election. So 2016, you had the Democrats saying that Russian influence had affected the election and that Donald Trump had not fairly won and that he was not the legitimate president. For 4 years, we were told Donald Trump was not legitimate president. Across mainstream media, across the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton said many, many occasions that she had legitimately won the election and that she never should have conceded. Now, she actually did concede the election, which is a major difference from what we saw in 2020. But after conceding, she then spent 4 years saying that she was the legitimate winner and she never should have conceded. And then she advised Joe Biden that should he lose in 2020, that he should not concede because that's how she lost the election. No, Mrs. Clinton, you lost because you didn't get enough votes in the Electoral College. That's why you lost. And then with the 2020 election, you see the same thing coming from the other side. The Republicans have stated, not all of them, but certainly a lot, have stated that Donald Trump legitimately won, that Joe Biden is not our president, and that the Democrats or Biden and his campaign, somebody, China, somebody did something to influence the elections and change the results. Now, of course, in both of these elections, neither of the losing sides had any real proof or even actual evidence that would suggest that they were the ones who actually won the election and that the president wasn't legitimate. It was mostly just claims and propaganda. And in both times, we had investigations of that election, which I'm not actually opposed to investigations. You should have an investigation if you think something's wrong, and it would prove whether something did or didn't happen. So I'm actually supportive of investigations, but in both cases, we had investigations. I'd say after the 2016 election, we probably had more investigations, and that's simply because that party, the losing party, controlled Congress for a time, while so far the Republicans have not controlled Congress since they lost in 2020. I do expect if they win this year that we'll start to see investigations into that election, just like what the Democrats did when they won in 2018. So the fact that this has happened twice now from both sides should be incredibly concerning to all Americans. And if that was all we were dealing with, that would be a significant threat as it is. But of course, that's not all we're dealing with. We're dealing with issues that are actually of far more consequence to the majority of Americans, such as the fact that we're dealing with record high inflation and incredibly high gas prices. And this is affecting Americans financially, particularly poor Americans. And then on top of that, I mean, we have a myriad of other issues, but then we have both sides that are passing legislation that not all Americans agree with. We're having extremely contentious debates surrounding national issues like gun control, climate change, abortion, transgender rights, and that's only a few of the topics that we're debating at a national level. Then on top of that, you have something that I've kind of alluded to earlier in the video, the fact that many of us feel like government, whether it's at a state level or a federal level, has become more tyrannical, more authoritarian, perhaps more totalitarian, which I do intend to do a video, by the way, that will discuss the difference between totalitarianism and authoritarianism. But the point is, many of us are concerned about tyrannical government that is going to infringe upon our rights and liberties. Now, of course, the left is primarily concerned about the right and their policies, while the right is primarily concerned about the left and their policies. Us in the center are concerned about the tyrannical rhetoric and actions that are coming from both sides, the left and the right, particularly those policies that are being put in place in reaction or in retaliation for something that the other side has done. So for all these reasons and many more that I don't have time to go over right now, I am incredibly concerned about where our country's going, what the future looks like. In fact, I've said many times, as those of you who know me already have heard before, that I feel like we're heading towards a dark period in our history. I don't know what's going to happen, but I do think we'll see increased political violence, something that we've already seen, but I do expect is going to get worse. Now, personally, I think this will be more along the lines of domestic terrorism from both sides, where they attack those that they disagree with or companies they disagree with, and try and force public policy to be changed based on terror tactics and violence. I know in the past there's been some confusion about the definition of terrorism, but that is what terrorism is at its core. It's violence that is being done in order to affect public policy, in order to affect politics or religious policies in a country. So my concerns about the situation both nationally and globally have very much motivated the creation of this channel. Now, I'm not arrogant or naive enough to believe that I'm going to make a big change or make a big difference with these videos. I'm just a guy on YouTube talking to a camera. I think that more of us, particularly those that hold more centrist or moderate views, need to start speaking out against the extremism that we're seeing on both the far left and the far right. And I feel like their views have been over amplified. I think there's an illusion that those two extreme sides represent a higher percentage of this country than they actually do. You know, as I said before, a third of us Americans are more moderate, and out of the 2/3 that would identify more with the left or right, I would say probably half of those hold more moderate views. And so you have a large majority of this country that do not support the far left and far right extremism that we're seeing more and more often from the two major political parties in this country. Therefore, I do think we all need to start speaking out. Me personally, I feel like I could bring a unique perspective, both because of my personal experiences in life, which are something that I'm sure I'll discuss more and more on this channel, but also because of my degree in political science with that focus on ideologies. So that's a major factor for why I'm creating this channel. I do believe that I could bring a different perspective to YouTube, or at least from the political channels that I've seen. It's no coincidence that I started YouTube in 2015, the same year that I graduated. When I graduated college, I was looking for a job. It took me a while to find a full-time one, so I was working part-time, and thus I had a lot of free time on my hands, and therefore I decided to start a YouTube channel. By early 2016, I still hadn't had much success on YouTube yet, and so I was highly considering starting up a political channel because it was an election year, and I really should have, because I've seen channels that did start that year. At this point, they already have millions of subscribers. Not saying that I would be that large if I had started one, but I really should have, since that's really where my passion lies. So I didn't do it in 2016. I regretted it. 2018, again, I considered doing the political channel. Didn't do it. Just life got in the way, things happening. And then 2020, I told myself that this would be the year that I start the political channel. Had the new presidential election coming up. It was a big, important presidential election. So I said, this is going to be the year that I get the channel started. Of course, I did not do so. So here we are again in an election year. Of course, it's not a presidential election, but we have the congressional election coming up in November. And I said, this is the year. I'm finally going to do it in the election year, start up this political channel, and here we are. And so because this is a topic that I am so interested in, I'm very excited to finally be doing this. So now there's a question of what type of content I'll be doing on this channel. So essentially we'll be having two types of videos. The first is going to be a more informative style, where it's not so much about me expressing my opinions or my views on an issue or policy. In fact, in those videos, I'll actively avoid sharing my opinions and my viewpoint as best as I can. Instead, we'll be focusing on the facts, the data, on the objective truth. I mentioned an example of this earlier in the video. I'd like to do an episode on each ideology, dedicated to each ideology. And in those videos, I'll be using my own personal knowledge that I've gained, both from going to university, attending classes, getting my degree, research that I did while writing papers to get that degree, as well as the research that I've done since getting my degree. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about certain topics, particularly ideologies. When I was getting my political science degree, my focus on that degree was on political thought, which is ideologies. For my history degree, my focus was on early modern European history. Another type of informative video I'm really looking forward to doing is the reading of bills, of legislation here in the United States. Now, I don't know how much we'll talk about like European bills, like a bill that's going to pass in France or in the United Kingdom or Germany. I think when I look at legislation, I'll probably be more focused on American legislation just because those are the type of bills I know how to read. I can't honestly say I've looked at a lot of European legislation, while American legislation, I'm very familiar with the way the bills are written, the wording they use, and how they're formatted. Whenever either party has a major piece of legislation that they're currently trying to get through to vote on, there's always a lot of rhetoric and propaganda surrounding that bill that is often incredibly inaccurate. And seemingly there's no reason for any of us to believe this propaganda since we can read the bills ourselves. But the problem is that those pieces of legislation are written in a way, I think, intentionally to be confusing so that we don't know what's in them. Because honestly, I think those who govern us don't want us to know what's in those bills. So what I want to do is actually look at each piece of legislation, go through it, explain what it actually does, what might be in it that certain people might object to, just kind of break through that propaganda that you often see coming from both sides about what a bill does. A lot of times it's again very inaccurate. And so that's one thing I'd like to do that would be more in the informative style video, not really sharing my opinion about the legislation, just telling you what's in it. And then the second type of format will be more opinion-based videos where I do share my opinion, my viewpoint. We'll likely look at stories in the news, recent events. We'll look at legislation as well. So we'll look at the merits of the arguments that both sides are putting forward on whether you should or should not support the bill, but it's going to be very opinion-based. One thing I'd like to make clear here in the very first video on the channel is that I do not intend to make a video or comment on every single news story that is happening. I know a lot of channels do that. A lot of political channels will, at the very least, maybe put out their position on social media. Maybe they'll do a full video on it, but they'll always address any big issue that's currently happening. And if they don't, then it's the same thing as addressing it. People expect that means something, that there's a reason why they're not putting forth any opinion on that matter. And this often results in viewers and fans demanding that this content creator put out their official position. You should not expect that from me. I will not address everything that is happening at the moment. Many times, even if I have a strong opinion about something, I might not share it for whatever reason. Maybe I just don't have the time. But I'm not extremely active on social media. I assume that I will, of course, become more active on social media with the creation of this channel than I was before. But I did want to make it clear that just because I don't make a statement on a particular issue or policy or a news story, that's not me saying anything about that, being in support or opposition to it. That's simply just me not making a statement, nothing more, nothing less. Don't read into it. So that's essentially the end of the video here. The last thing I did want to go over though is what my plans are for the next two videos. What I wanted to do with these first two episodes is sort of show how much I personally can vary on different issues. Some issues I certainly fall on the left, while other issues I fall more on the right. Despite identifying as a centrist, remember the definition of centrist, I do fall more on one side than on the other. So while I do support some right-wing policies, I think I do lean slightly left. Now I've done those political polls that you can do online. There's a wide variety of them, and I typically always fall around the same place. When it comes to the left and right axis, I'm usually about -1, so slightly on the left, very slightly on the left. And then on the y-axis, which is usually like authoritarian versus libertarianism, I'm usually a 0. So right in the middle, or maybe a -1, slightly towards the libertarian. So even though I do have some more radical policy ideas that I support, I do very much fall in the center overall with that slight lean to the left. So the plan is to have one video about an issue where I support the more left-wing policy, and then to have another video where I support the right-wing policy. So the first video, which will come out the same day as this episode, will be on the left-wing policy that I support, and then the second video over the right-wing policy, that'll come out the next day, so the day after this video. So that means in total we'll have 3 videos this week because it is the first week of the channel. However, do not expect that to be the norm. My plan is to have probably 1 video per week. I hope to have those uploaded on Friday. That's the goal, to upload 1 video every Friday. Now, if the channel becomes more popular and viewership increases, then you can't expect that the content would also increase and would probably do more than 1 video per week. But as of now, it'll just be the 1. And that is largely because I won't be earning any money on this channel for quite some time, and I do have other work that I have to do. In regards to monetization on YouTube, these first few videos won't be monetized, at least initially, because you do have to have certain requirements fulfilled in order to monetize your channel. The first is you got to have 1,000 subscribers, and you also have to have 10,000 hours of watch time, total watch time on your channel within a 28-day or 30-day period. I'm not sure which. There will be other ways that you can support the channel if you so desire. I'm going to launch a Patreon hopefully the day this video comes out. If not the day of, then a couple days after. So we'll have a Patreon up where you can do monthly support. Then I also intend to have a PayPal set up where you can do one-time donations if you prefer that. And then finally, we'll have a merchandise store. I don't know when that'll get launched. That'll take a bit more time to do. So if you find yourself enjoying my content and you'd like to see the videos come out more often, then there will be other ways for you to support the channel financially until we get the monetization set up here on YouTube. Alright guys, that's going to be it for this first episode. Hope you guys did enjoy it. If you did, make sure you have a like on the video, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment. I will be trying to read through as much comments as I can whenever I have time, so I'd love to hear from you guys and what you think about the channel, what type of content you'd like to see. That's what I'd particularly like to hear from you guys about is what type of content you want me to cover, what type of topics, what type of issues. If you have a particular legislation you'd like me to go over, then feel free to share that in the comments below. So I do hope to see you on one of those next 2 videos that'll be coming out here after this one, and thanks for watching.